Hello, everybody. Thank you to all the graduate students and staff and faculty members at UT Austin for organizing this event. It's my pleasure to take part in this conversation about the sources or objects we use to examine the knowledge produced by historical actors, as well as the historical and present-day practice of archiving materials that bear witness to Latin American history. I wish we could all be together at the Benson Library, which, as we all know, has an extraordinary collection of Latin American knowledge sources, and whose librarians are actively involved in making the repository a living center for public dialogue, as evidenced by this conference. My presentation today takes inspiration from questions raised by the words of our panel's title, Reconociendo Community Rights Through Archives and Memory. First, what is the impetus today in our present time for a desire to know and acknowledge, to conocer, the long history of communities formulating and preserving rights that enabled their members to live with dignity? And by rights here, I'm mainly referring to principles like liberty upheld by social and legal practices. Second, how might we define community? It's a capacious word. Is a community a body of people who share kinship ties, people who practice a religion, people who share a common experience such as forced migration? Or is it a group of people whose identity is tied to a specific place, a sacred land? All of these definitions, to my mind, are equally valid. They indicate that communities self-determine. Community members decide what defines them, and these definitions, as well as ideas about who belongs and does not, always change over time. Third, and this is critical for me as an archival historian, what is our responsibility to community members who descend from the people we write about, especially those whose historical memories might reflect a past that we as outsiders know little about? My reflection today answers some of these queries by way of a case study, the life experience of a woman named Antona, who lived in Mexico's Black Pacific during the late 1500s, over 400 years ago. I want to share with you parts of her story because a person's life, her experience, can provide a window into her community and shed light on the rights that they held sacrosanct. For Antona and her family, and community, the right in question was legal freedom, an inalienable right. Antona. We know about her, sabemos de ella, because the Archivo Histórico Municipal de Morelia safeguards a thick pile of papers that testify to her lived experience. We have the opportunity to know her, to conocerla, through these documents as well, at least to some degree, because they contain her testimony. In August 1598, Antona claimed her legal freedom at court. She stood before the municipal judge in the city of Valladolid, now Morelia, explained her circumstances, and petitioned him, the judge, to intervene on her behalf. She wanted to go back home with her children and to reunite with her husband, Baltasar, and the rest of her community. They all lived on the coast of Zacatula, a province situated along the Pacific, some 200 miles from where she was then residing. This copy of a map of the ecclesiastical organization of the region at the time gives you a sense of the distance from where she was in Valladolid down to Zacatula. Antona and her children had been forced to travel from their home in the lowlands all the way up to Valladolid. Antona had lived most of her life in cacao country. This drawing evokes the the centrality of cacao to the economy of the larger region at the end of the 16th century, which continued to be the case through the following one. Large plantations and smaller farms or huertas, like the one that's circled here, dotted the landscape. And like this one, many were located near or along the many rivers and streams that emptied into the Pacific, which facilitated irrigation and the transportation of the commodity, cacao, to markets. These waterways, however, were also networks that preserved community ties as they enabled people who worked at different cacao plantations to visit relatives using small boats that coasted the ocean shore and traveled inland. These people had ties to the cacao economy. Many were forced to work in plantations, but their lives were not defined by their labor. Antona's case, spelled out over some 30 pages, 30 pages, informs us about the circumstance that brought her before the judge in Valladolid. It includes documents like the 1593 will and testament of a slave owner, a fragment shown here on screen, which contained a clause that made a legal promise that his heir would arrange for her eventual manumission and for the immediate freedom of her 3 children. As the testament made clear, the children were to remain under the care and with Antona, who was to continue working for an additional 4 years in the same cacao plantation where they then resided. So Antona came before the judge in 1597, so like 3 or 4 years later, because the slave owner's heir had not fulfilled the agreement and had instead sold her and her children illegally to the person who now held them, quote, as slaves in Valladolid. So I'll go into more detail about this case at the conference. Antona's case can be described as a freedom suit. It is one of tens of thousands, and probably more like hundreds of thousands of freedom suits. No one has yet cataloged them, found in archives throughout the Americas. Scholars have been employing these materials for decades to continue reconstructing the history of freedom and slavery in the American hemisphere, which began in the context of transoceanic contacts in the late 1490s and lasted through the end of the 1800s. Some freedom suits involve people who cross the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, while others are about people born into slavery in the Americas, like Antona. Now, the term freedom suit, which usually did involve one person or a family, might suggest that these were only individual actions, that the cases only reflect the choices made by women and men to secure individual rights, the human right to not be someone else's property. But that's only part of the story. In reality, these freedom suits also reflect the choices made by individuals with the support of their communities and for the purpose of preserving community unity. As other scholars have similarly pointed out, many legally enslaved people who filed suits conceived of liberty as a status that enabled them to protect their families, to keep their communities together. Antona fought to confirm the manumission of her children and her own so that they could all have the freedom to return to Zacatula and rejoin a community of legally free and enslaved African descended and Asian descended people whose ties transgressed the legal divisions imposed by a state that upheld slavery. Today, the descendants of people like Antona, people who live along the Black Pacific coast, from Zacatula to the Costa Chica and beyond, are taking part in a national conversation about what it means to be Afro-Mexicanos. Economic and political disenfranchisement in this region is very real. And there rightly continues to be a reckoning about the legacies of the transatlantic slave trade. Racism and white supremacy, and yes, you can use that term in the context of 21st century Mexico. These are some of the legacies of the transatlantic and transpacific slave trades. To my mind, the actions of those who came before us, even more than 400 years ago, reflect the ongoing social justice efforts of African-descended communities to have the state recognize, reconocer their rights as citizens, and to do something to amend structural inequality. With that, I say that I look forward to our panel discussion, and I thank you for your attention.